You're not stuck because your marketing failed. You're stuck because you stopped asking who you are and who you serve. Welcome to this episode of the MSP Insider Whiteboard series, where we're going to break down the concept from my interview with Jonathan Schofield. The concept here is really for MSPs who feel like they've been failing because of bad marketing, when really it's because you've been abdicating ownership of sales, of identity, and of truth, and how to restore it. It's super simple. There's 5 questions. I promise that you can do it. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly how. So let's dive straight in. Just like I said at the beginning or at the opener, it doesn't really matter what excuse you place into that particular sentence, right? It could be, well, I've tried SEO, or I've paid for lead gen on some sort of retainer, but I got nothing for it. Or I've sent cold emails and no one responded. Hell, they didn't even open the email. Or maybe you've gone to live events and you've invested heavily in a budget, yet nothing happened, right? No leads, no ROI, and perhaps not even any clarity on what to do, why you should be doing it, and where any of that's going to come from. So here's the truth that most will not say out loud. You don't actually have a marketing problem. You have a mirror problem. Now, what do I mean by that? It's pretty simple, truly. You don't know who your customer is. You haven't asked them where they are, and you've never even taken the time to define what makes you the only partner worth choosing for them. So the bullets that you've been firing through the marketing, the sales engine, it's not that the bullets are missing. It's that there was never any target for them intended to hit. And the real problem is that MSPs are hemorrhaging cash, chasing playbooks that they never even wrote for customers that they never even defined. Jonathan called this out perfectly in our interview.
After $70,000 in 12 months. Well, why didn't this work? The answer they got from the agency, well, we really should have increased your ad spend.
Now, MSPs aren't lazy. They are hopeful, right? But hope without clarity is really just bleeding your budget. The industry sort of forces this broken methodology on top of you as well, where you're tracking things like SaaS companies do, right? You're dealing with these private equity playbooks or gurus who've never even sold to SMBs, let alone sold MSP services to SMBs. Then you're taking all of these concepts that they're force feeding you, you're applying them to the company, and then you end up not even really recognizing yourself anymore or your company.
The brutal truth is they don't want what they say they want.
Because the truth is, if they did, they'd be doing the work instead of just funding the fantasy. Now, no one is coming to save you. You have to own that ask. Now, that might hurt a little bit, but it's also the truth because I've lived it. I've experienced it. I've gone through this arc. It might even feel like a little bit of a gut punch. But here's the deal. You do not grow because you bought the right bullet, right? You grow because you actually aimed. And the only way to aim is to know exactly who you are, to know exactly who they are, to know how to get in front of them, and then ask them for the truth. Yeah, you don't need to know their answer. You just have to ask the question. You see, the sales playbook, it isn't just found magically inside a peer group meeting. It's actually reverse engineered from the people who are your best clients who've already bought. So let's walk through a model here and break this down a little bit further, as I've seen most MSPs sort of place themselves on this particular quadrant. And then we'll walk you through how to go from pain and anguish into getting the results that you actually want. So starting here in the bottom left corner is frustrations. Right. And most MSPs that are in this category, what they end up seeing, or how I hear them show up and like what it sounds like to listen to them, is we've tried everything and nothing worked. Right. So this is more like the tried and failed. And then people just end up writing it off entirely in their head because they tried a couple of things and they didn't get the intended result, not realizing that there was so much more to what it takes to get the result that you were looking for. Now, generally speaking, where they'll move next is out of this frustration and more into the fear zone. And in the fear zone, what this ends up looking like what how I hear it sounding is, well, what if we just keep wasting money, right? So like you have been throwing some cash towards it, but what happens if you just keep throwing it out the window, right? And again, it's fueling by the wrong things. And one of the things that Robert Gillette said on the interview, he talks explicitly about doing the right things, right? And that's ultimately where you'll start to see the needle move. So we have to shift out of the, well, I've already tried it and I failed. That's a fixed mindset, a broken mindset, a victim mentality. And the evolution, the next evolution tends to be that, well, what if we just keep wasting the money and you don't really get to an outcome at all? And that's just kind of the way that unfolds. So as we ascend above this, like getting above our own limitations, right? Like the false belief line is probably how I would call that. False belief. So if we get above the false belief line, this is where we really can start to move in. Well, what is it that you really want, right? Like what is it that you want? And getting really clear on that. This is usually where like it's where we start, but then we end up down in the lower buckets because we just execute really quick, or we abdicate the ownership of what we wanted anyone that we outsource this stuff to do, because we just sit right here, which is basically well, all I want is just qualified leads, right? And there's nothing wrong with that being what we want. The issue sort of seems to come from not connecting the dots between what it takes to actually get what we want in that particular category, which then takes us to the last column, which is the aspiration. And the aspiration is we actually want to grow, but on our own terms, right? Like we say, hey, I just need more leads and then we'll grow. But the reality is you don't actually just want the more leads. You want the growth. You want the outcome. You want the thing that comes from being able to facilitate conversations that transfer conviction and convert into new customers. Now, what did Jonathan have to say about this? His commandment, if you will, for how you go through this process, especially when you don't know how, and even if you're a little bit jaded because of how you've done some things in the past, was wherever your prospect is, there thou shalt also be. Now, it's a ridiculous tongue twister, which is also kind of what makes it memorable. It's how I remembered it from the conversation. Now, there's really just 5 things that you have to do to go from the bottom left to the top right. And that is what we're going to break down the rest of this conversation from the episode with Jonathan. So let's say the commandment again, right? Wherever your prospect is, there thou shalt also be. What are we ultimately talking about? We're going to go to where the fish are. We're going to go to where the prospects are. We're going to go to where the ideal future client sits, and we're going to get in front of them. How do we do that? How do we start? I mean, it sounds amazing, but how the hell do you start? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to define your top 5 clients. And once we do, and these are the top ideal clients, right? And you may not have any in your current book of business, and that's okay if that's the case. But otherwise, you do have clients and they've chosen to work with you and you've done great work for them. So just look at your current client base. Don't make this harder than it has to be, and pick the 5 best clients that you currently have. And then what do you need to do? You need to ask them this question. If I was hit by a bus, how would you replace me? Now, that might seem a little morbid, and it might even seem a little bit uncomfortable. We don't even necessarily care about the immediate answer. We want to understand what we can unpack from how they begin answering that particular question. What do I mean? We want to find out, how did they find you in the first place? Why have they stayed with you since they became a client with you? Right? There's plenty of other options. Why are they still there? And then what they'd never say out loud. When we put those 3 things together, that is your growth playbook. It's not marketing. It's not SEO. It's not PPC. It's not outsourcing.
We've identified way closer who your ideal customer is. So we're not going to waste your time going after nonprofits, but we do IT for nonprofits today. It's like, I'm not saying you necessarily would say no next time a nonprofit gives you a call, but you're not seeking them out.
Now, what does ownership-driven growth actually look like through Jonathan's eyes? The highest performing MSPs that Jonathan works with, they stopped looking for those magic silver bullets, right? They built their own, and they asked their customers to co-build the event, right? They let the prospects choose the time, the place, the format. They reverse engineered the relationships. There was no cold targeting at all. This is the great inversion, right? You don't actually have to manufacture demand. You're just harvesting clarity out of what you've already accomplished. And then you can multiply what actually works.
Once you identify where your customer is, and then you identify the actions required to get you in proximity with your customer, then it's just a volume play.
So once you've labeled or identified or found those ideal clients in your current book, and we've asked them those questions, right? Ask those probing questions that actually start to unpack the reality, we're future pacing them, right? If something happened to you or your business, where would they go? Why would they go there? And how would they figure out whether or not they wanted to make that next choice to replace you? And it gets so much simpler because if we go back up to this matrix, right, the whole goal is like, well, we don't want to be frustrated. We actually want the MRR, right? We want the new client. We want growth. We tend to get stuck in all the other three categories. So what we really are trying to focus on is how the hell do we go from here up into this top upper right quadrant where it's all about winning and growth without all of the insanity that the market and that the industry tries to throw on us. And we boil it down very simply, just like I promised at the opening, with basically the number 5, right? We're going to pick 5 clients, and then we're going to book 5 calls. Now, these may not be actual calls. It should be at least a phone call. Shouldn't be an email. It needs to be a phone call. But it also could be take them to lunch, take them to dinner, take them to drinks, go meet them in their office, do something else. But it's 5 calls to those 5 clients and then 5 uncomfortable questions, right? It is literally as simple as these 5 things, which if you times it by 3, sure, maybe there's 15 things involved. Whatever. 5 uncomfortable questions. What are they? The first question you need to ask them is, where would you look if I disappeared? Right? If the company wasn't here tomorrow, like where is it that you would actually look for our replacement? Right? So the very first one, let's go here. 5 questions, right? So that was step number 2. That was step number 1. This was step number 3. Promised you a bunch of 5s. So the 5 uncomfortable questions. Where would you go to look for a solution or replacement, whatever, if I disappeared? The next one is what? What actually makes us hard to replace, right? So the next one is a what question. What is it? Is it our people? Is it the location? Right? Is it all the stuff? It doesn't matter. Do not feed them either. We do not want to influence their answer. We want to know the real answer. What would make it hard to replace us? The next one, another what question. What frustrates you about us? Be honest, be open, be ruthless. What would you like to see changed, right? Because that's actually going to tell you the hidden layer of the conversation, which gives you an opportunity to improve, to keep that current client, but it also gives you the language that would show you where the frustrations of the next prospects are. And you can speak to those problems. You can speak to that frustration and then deliver on it as well. Number 4 was, what other providers do you talk to, right? So maybe they have already talked to other providers, or maybe they're actually going and talking to their network. Maybe they're talking to their accountant. Maybe they talked to their lawyer. Figure out who in their circle they're going out to seek the advice from, because then we want to figure out, where do those people go, right? I call it right angle targeting, which is a conversation for maybe another whiteboard, but specific to this one. Now, the 5th question is a bit more rhetorical, right? What would 10 more of that ideal client look like? You need to think through that, like literally close your eyes and start to visualize based off some of the answers that you're getting. Ask yourself that one question. What would it look like to get 10 more of that particular client? And start to synthesize that down and deduce it down to the things that make it great when you start to truly funnel into or fall into a niche, because you can't just sit down and create one, usually when working with MSPs at least, but you can work yourself there by structuring the right conversations with the right people to get to that result. So then what do? Then we build, right? You build everything around the answers to those 5 questions. Now, just like Jonathan says, wherever your prospect is, there thou shalt also be, right? Now, that's way too freaking complicated for me to keep saying out loud, so I just wrote it down this way. I, this is your commitment to yourself, I am going to go where my future clients are. And when you get there, you're going to know exactly what to say. You're going to have worked through their thought process, because we just extracted that from our current clients. And we will literally just be spoon feeding or iterating that reality back to them to lead them to the promised land, so to speak, which is the MSP, where you're already doing things that you need or want and that they want for their peer ultimately, right? So the thing is, we're going to go to where our prospects are, but we're not going to be blind, right? We aren't going to be leading with guesswork, and we will lead with truth. Why do we know it's true? Because we got the truth out of their peer. The growth that you crave, it's not buried in a funnel somewhere. It's buried in the conversations that you've actually been avoiding. So what you need to do right now, create that list and then start asking and start owning and start building from the inside out. That is how MSPs stop wandering around and start multiplying their growth.